Hey there, biology. Mrs. Cozen here, and we're going to start talking about cellular respiration today. Okay, this is going to be we're going to be video 2A cellular respiration intro. Okay, guys, that's going to be the title of this video. It's the very first one under segment 2. Okay, and you already have this picture drawn right here. Okay, this is just quick review of photosynthesis. Because the great thing about cellular respiration is if you already know photosynthesis, you already know cellular respiration. It's just flip-flopped. Okay, so remember in photosynthesis, guys, we have light energy in our chloroplast. So this is only happening in our plant cells. Okay, water goes in because plants need water and CO2, and it puts out oxygen and sugars, which we use in cellular respiration. Okay, and so we take light, and in our light-dependent reactions, we store energy as ATP, which we use to run the Calvin cycle to put out sugars. Then we use those sugars in turn to make more ATP during cellular respiration. Okay. One thing that I want you guys to get in your head right now before we get moving on is that all living things have to go through this next cellular respiration. Okay. Even plants have to go through it. So just because plants do this doesn't mean that they don't have to do the next step, okay? They have to do it as well. So all living things go through it. Even bacteria who don't have a mitochondria go through it in sort of a process called fermentation, which we're also going to talk about. Okay. All right. So most of the stuff you guys are going to find is in chapter 9. Okay. Don't rely on this, you guys, to be just your list of vocabulary words. There's a lot more stuff that you're going to learn. Okay, but our big focus here is definitely cellular respiration and the different processes, okay? This first video, you guys, I'm going to get through glycolysis, anaerobic, and this thing called fermentation. That's the stuff I'm going to get through in this first video, okay? So I'm going to talk about what do we do when we don't have oxygen? What do we do at the very beginning? And what cellular respiration is. All right, so starting you off with a mitochondria joke, because I just know that's what you're waiting for today. Right here, you guys, we have 2 mitochondria. One's lounging on the couch, and this one is screaming at the other. When are you planning to find a job? And you can tell they're mitochondria, you guys. They have these little membranes that sort of look like a maze. That's one thing that sets them apart from chloroplasts. Chloroplasts have those stacks of little green pancakes. Remember, they're not really pancakes, called thylakoids. Mitochondria have these membranes, okay? And next part says, and don't give me the excuse you don't have any energy. You're a mitochondria for nucleus sake. Haha. Get it? Because the nucleus is like the boss of the cell. Okay. So moving on to the mitochondria. Okay. So cellular respiration used by plants, animals, and bacteria. Okay. So you guys can add bacteria right over here. And it's going to happen inside the mitochondria. We got a couple of steps that happen outside before, but the huge majority of it happens in the mitochondria. And this process right here is how you guys are getting all the energy you need to do all the things you need, to do all the things you do. Okay. So again, the great thing about this formula, if you memorize photosynthesis, this is the exact same thing. It's just flip-flopped. Okay. Plants put out sugar and oxygen. Okay. We use it. So cellular respiration, the reactants, are the products of photosynthesis, okay? Plants put out sugar, plants put out oxygen. We use sugar, we use oxygen, okay? And then we breathe out CO2, water, and energy. You can tell this right now, you guys, if you stop and you actually breathe into the palm of your hand, okay? I actually want you to do that, okay? Stop right now, pause, and take one quick breath out into the palm of your hand, okay? When you breathe out into the palm of your hand, what do you feel? You feel air hitting it, right? Okay, the majority of that air coming out is carbon dioxide. It's a byproduct of what you've done in your body. It also feels wet. Okay, you are releasing water vapor, and it also feels warm. You are releasing energy. We release that energy, some of it as heat, and then some of it's stored and used as ATP. Okay, so you can actually feel all 3 of these things when you breathe out into your palm. Okay. Okay. Now, first step we got to do is we have to break down the stuff that was made during photosynthesis, okay? So photosynthesis here, we made sugar. We have to process it first, okay? And that's this first thing called glycolysis, okay? Break it up into 2 parts. Glycolysis, glyco, glucose, okay? C6H12O6, memorize it now. Lysis means to cut or to break, okay? Glycolysis means we're breaking glucose up. Okay. This one happens in the cytoplasm. So we're not exactly in the mitochondria just yet. Okay. Almost there. This one can happen without oxygen because we're not really making we're not really making a lot of ATP. We're just breaking up our glucose. Think of it like when you want to cook something and you have to like chop up vegetables or fruit or something before you actually cook it. That's what glycolysis is. We're just cutting the glucose in half so we can use it later on. Okay. You're only going to get a little bit of ATP out of that, which we're going to use later. Here's the big thing. When we chop glucose up, we get a new molecule called pyruvic acid that's smaller and easier for us to process. And we're also going to get something, think of it like another sort of version of ATP. Okay, it's carrying a hydrogen. So hydrogen always means energy. So it's sort of like a charged up battery. Okay, we got two little teeny tiny bits of energy we can use, and then a lot of raw materials that we can continue to use. Okay, so glycolysis, processing glucose. Okay. And that can happen without oxygen. Okay, so we don't really need oxygen for that part to happen. Now, if you are going to go ahead and continue on with oxygen, which I'm going to talk about more in the next video, that's called aerobic respiration. And there's two parts called the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. These happen in the mitochondria and they happen when we have oxygen present. Okay, glycolysis is not technically part of that. Okay, but you got to have glycolysis happen first before this can happen. Okay. Anything I talk about here, you guys, this is always the first step. Glycolysis is always the first step. Okay. If you have oxygen, you go on to these two. Okay. If you don't have oxygen, you go to this. Okay. Called anaerobic. Think of the prefix an means not. Okay. Think if you're anti something, you're against something. Okay. Anaerobic means no oxygen. Okay. And I know it probably seems to you guys, well, we breathing in oxygen. There's no way we ever do this. But we do have one version, which I'll talk about later, that we actually do, that we complete in our bodies. That's anaerobic, okay? And the big title for that is fermentation. There's different types of it, okay? So we always start here. If you've got oxygen, you go here. If you don't, you go to anaerobic, okay? Okay, now anaerobic. Fermentation. We're going to stay in the cytoplasm. Okay. So somewhere here in your notes, write down in cytoplasm. We don't go to the mitochondria unless there's oxygen. Okay. So after I chopped up the glucose, if I've got no oxygen, I go to this thing called fermentation. Fermentation cannot happen for very long. Okay. Because without oxygen, the process, if in our bodies, it can't happen for very long. Okay. In our bodies, if we go through fermentation, we go through a thing called lactic acid fermentation. And you have all felt it happen. Anytime that you do any kind of exercise that requires like a short burst of energy, like lifting a really heavy weight or sprinting 100 yards, you felt lactic acid fermentation. And it's a process where we've sort of run out of oxygen. That's why you're breathing so hard at the end of it. You're trying to replace that oxygen. And it's actually something that sort of breaks down the fibers in our muscles to help them build back up. If you want your muscles to get bigger, you have to do those type of exercises. It's not the only thing you have to do, but has to be one part of your regimen is getting those short bursts of energy in. And it also happens, it can happen for a longer time in some sort of food processes. Your yogurt, if you guys have ever heard of probiotic, we have bacteria that are anaerobic and they love to work when there's no oxygen. Alcoholic fermentation, it's how we make alcohol. Okay, it's how we make beer. There's yeast in there that continues to eat sugar, and one of the byproducts of it is alcohol. Okay, yeast in bread. Okay, it produces a type of alcoholic fermentation, and all those little teeny tiny holes you guys see in your piece of bread. Those are all a byproduct of alcoholic fermentation. Okay, there's sort of a bacteria. Think of yeast almost as a bacteria. Okay, it works really great when there's no oxygen. Okay, so you guys, that is the end of the first video. Okay, that's cellular respiration intro. And the next one, I'm going to start talking about what happens when we actually have oxygen. Okay, all right, and you guys are all set with that one. See you later.